Thank you, David. And I want to thank Jen Palka, who's such an amazing leader running such an incredibly important organization, for inviting me here today. So I've had the fortune, on some days misfortune, of probably consuming more political consumer research than maybe anybody on the planet over the last 15 years. And what's always revealing when you spend time with our fellow citizens, it's just a great reminder about how they view issues like the economy and government. So on the economy, during the 2012 re-election campaign for Barack Obama, as the economy was beginning to heal, what was always fascinating is when you'd sit down with groups of citizens or voters in Ohio or Florida or Virginia, they didn't talk about the economy through the lens of the unemployment rate or the stock market or corporate profits. They simply would say, I feel a little bit better about the economy because I go to Walmart every Saturday morning and I had to park a little further away from the entrance. Or I go to dinner with my wife every month at the same restaurant. It was a little more crowded this time. Or my brother had been living on my couch for the last year and a half and has been able to move out because he's now making enough money. Same thing with government. When you sit down in Marshalltown, Iowa, or Lorain, Ohio, or Roanoke, Virginia, and you ask people to talk about government, very rarely do they talk about government programs. The debates of the day on Capitol Hill or in their state legislature or in their city council, they talk about their own most recent personal experience with government. Whether that is going on a government website, interacting with a government official, going to the DMV, the most famous example, that is the prism through which they experience government. And it's incredibly important, I think, to understand that, because whether we're right, left, center, in this country or many others, restoring and rebuilding faith and trust in all institutions, including government, is incredibly important. And I believe you're simply not going to get to where we need to get until people's individual experience with government is what they expect. Most people today, I think it's fair to say, maybe not most, but many, any time they have to go down the government portal, I am going to have to engage with a government agency or department, they dread it. They dread it. And until that changes, we're not going to build the foundations, I think, for democracy, which we know always has to be strengthened and renewed. So this is not just about the individual effects of this, which are pronounced, obviously. We have individual citizens out there struggling financially. Most people who live in poverty, people earning low income, the pressures of time are as strong as the pressures of money. And so when things are taking them days and hours that should take minutes, that has such a punishing impact on those citizens. So the individual impact of government services that are not behaving in the way they should as a citizen views it are detrimental to that person, their family, their community. But I think there's a bigger existential question that if we don't get this right, we're not going to be as strong as we need to be. I think this is incredibly important to the future of our democracy. So I'm not someone who's at all, I think, going to be any value to any of you talking about what needs to be built. But I will give you the perspective of someone who did serve in government and politics for far too long about some approach. The first thing I think it's important is you have to have champions. So Jen talked about the room where it happens. And I agree, this is the room where it happens. But if you're not in the room where it happens, in Washington, in state capitals, in nonprofits, in philanthropic organizations, it's not going to work. So I'll give you an example of this. In 2007, which is prehistoric these days, I was managing the first Obama campaign, and one of the first decisions I made was we were going to have our digital director, I think we called them new media back then, was going to report into me. And traditionally in politics, and I think in many companies at the time, that person and the team would report up in through communications or through finance. It was an amazingly controversial decision. No one liked it then. They didn't like it when we won. I think a bunch of people are still angry today. But that was an incredibly important decision just because we wanted those talented leaders not to be under the thumb of one part of the campaign. We wanted them to think more expansively. And what's amazing, in 2018, in many parts of government, you go to a state capitol, you go to a city council, some parts of Washington, although that's gotten a lot better. This is true even for a lot of companies outside of Silicon Valley. There's nobody with your skills in the room at the very beginning of debates. Policy formation, legislative drafting, rule change. I would submit today it is still more the exception than the rule. and that is a tragedy. I think the press has a role to play here. If a politician gets up at a microphone or gets on a Facebook Live and says, I think I'm going to introduce this piece of legislation, or we should change that rule, those people need to be challenged for how are you going to implement it? How are you going to measure it? What's the user experience like? It just doesn't happen. So you need champions who are going to ensure that the structure of the organization you're working in allows you to be at the table. And because I think all too often, folks with engineering or design or even data background are not there at that original discussion. They're there to be implementers and talk about execution. And I think that is tragedy, because all too often right now, there's an old expression, I think Edna St. Vincent Millay, the poet, was said to have said this others, which is loving humanity and hating people. And too often, I think, when we think about government programs, they're not designed from a human-centered approach. Good intentions, good motivations, but we're not thinking through at that human level. And so I think you need champions to get your work done, because as you know, you can have the best idea, the best tool, the best piece of code, the best idea for an app. And if you don't have the right champion to be at your side, making sure that gets implemented, it's not going to get maybe even to first base, much less where you need it to go. I think I'll give you an example from my former boss, Barack Obama. There's a political example. 2012, you guys might remember we had a horrendous first debate, catastrophic failure. Election got a little closer after that. And we had two sets of data. So in the state of Ohio, which was the central state at that time, it was kind of a checkmate for our opponent, had to win it. Research in the days after the debate, using more sophisticated modern research methods, basically our data analytics team that was sitting on exercise balls in a room with a disco ball, said race stable. Old line political polling, race not stable. Up 3, up 2, up 1, tied, down 1. So that was pretty important to us 3 weeks out from the election. So the decision was, do we basically stop going to states like Virginia and Florida and just focus in Ohio, basically run for governor of Ohio? Well, Barack Obama did not like to talk about polling or data, but this was a decision, quite frankly, we couldn't settle ourselves. We had a raging internal debate. So I had to go to him and say, well, Mr. President, here's the situation. One set of data, other set of data. What do you want to do? Other than being highly annoyed that I came to him with this question, his reaction was 4 words: I trust the kids. So you need a champion, okay, who believed in what we built, but when it came to a tough moment, was going to be there for you. I think you also need champions who will bust bureaucracy for you. This is incredibly important. Even if you're in the room, you're there at conception, you feel empowered, there's going to be moments and times, governments, small or large, where you're not able to function. And so who are you going to identify to help you bust bureaucracy at that moment? I think is critical. I think it's important that it's not just government that change. I'm now at the Zuckerberg initiative. We're a relatively new philanthropic organization, but really trying to bring engineering to bring social change at scale. The people in our society who should have access to the best tools, the best data, don't have it. People who are organizing to reform the criminal justice system. People who are trying to work with the immigrant population to get them naturalized or to get them services. People are trying to help identify housing opportunities for people here in California. Teachers in classroom, bench scientists, they don't have it. And I think we need to think anew about what philanthropic organizations can do to modernize as well. Now, there's a lot of good things happening out there. You saw some in the video. Just last year, the U.S. Digital Service and the Customs and Immigration Service finally brought the citizenship application process online in 2017. It's going to make a huge difference. Prop 40, huge, The food stamp work that Code for America's led here. Okay, it's down to 7 minutes for an application. That is going to make a profound difference for millions of people, recipients and their families. But also then, what's the holy grail is, well, how do people, we should not be in a situation where people are filling out 7, 8, 9 different government forms. There should be one form, all that information and data speaking together. Prop 47, which passed here in California in 2014, so incredibly important. Reclassifying many drug offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. 1.5 million people are eligible. Now the problem is it wasn't done automatically. They have to apply it. Super complicated, janky process. Less than 25% of people have done that. Those lives can be transformed if they take that step. So this is a place where you have a defined audience where technology and marketing can make a huge difference. So I think, I'll end by saying this. I think one of the greatest challenges to our country right now is the most talented people, the most innovative people in our society do not think about working in government, whether that's running for office or working in agencies. You guys are the exception. You're changing that. It is a massive problem. And I think the more that our government, so someone who's thinking about running for office or government, and that experience gets every day fundamentally separated from the way we transact the rest of our lives, whether it's Amazon or Netflix or the local television station website. That is how people want to both live their lives and operate professionally. And so you guys are doing such incredibly important work. And we see right now, probably for the largest percentage of people since the early 60s, under 30, want to run for office. They want to go work in government. Maybe not as a career, but as a tour of duty. And I think that that motivation, I don't think, will be fully realized unless people think, when I go in there, I'm going to have the tools I expect that I might have in my private sector company to do my job, to measure it, to innovate. And so I think this is about, one, improving the experience and the outcomes of our citizens who are living on the absolute margins. Half of our country right now cannot afford an unanticipated $400 bill. Think about that. It can ruin them. And making this work better for them is so important. I think it can restore more trust and faith in democracy if people's experience with government is not dread, but a pleasant surprise, and maybe even rewarding, more times than not. And I think it will be incentive to get the people we most want to seek office and to work in organizations in government to do so. So you guys are doing heroic work. I couldn't be more excited to be with you today, and I just wish you the best of luck. So thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, David.